your tremendous leadership, for being an exemplary social worker. And also, you know, Jeanette Rankin was a social worker.
Yes,
Montana, who voted, was the only vote against World War II. I was really surprised to learn later that she was actually a social worker. So our profession has a deep tradition of activism, of changing the world, really. And that's who we are as social workers. And so thank you again for being here. Let me thank Dr. McLean, Harold Wheeler, Timothy Schmaltz, and all of you for your leadership and for making sure that social workers and the practice of social work is a vocation that really changes people's lives, but also changes systems and structural issues that really affect people's lives. I'm a psychiatric social worker by profession, and I really wanted to be, and did for a couple of years, was a clinical social worker. And we were trained at UC Berkeley in psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And my field placements put me right in the middle of the low-income African-American communities in Berkeley and in Oakland. And what I learned was that, yes, people who are living on the edge are depressed. They don't know what to do next because they're living under so much stress. And therapy helps. But you know what? If you don't have a job, and if you can't find daycare, and if you don't have a decent place to live, and if the system jerks you around, then who wouldn't be depressed? So I had big fights with my professors up in Cal about the treatment modalities that they were only, teaching, and so I had a class. And part of my coursework was to look at problems in mental health in the area, which of course I looked at because I was working in Berkeley Outpatient Psychiatric Clinic and Highland Hospital Inpatient Unit. And so I looked at the mental health issues in my community, laid out what the problems were, did the research on what all of the alternatives were in terms of providing treatment to low-income people of color, primarily African Americans, and then part of the project was to propose alternatives. And so I did this, I developed this into a paper, and I think I got probably a B+. They just wouldn't give me an A. I was too rowdy, I guess. And so I decided to go to the community projects office at Cal, because that project office supported students with projects as it related to the community. So I developed this paper into a proposal and went to the community projects office, and they said no. Now, mind you, there had been no black students who got projects funded. This was in the day, in the 70s. So naturally, I had to raise a little bit of cane about it. And, as we do as students, a little bit of street heat, a little bit, I'm going to organize, look, this project is worthy of at least $2 grand, like you fund all these other projects for these students. So I got it finally, $2,000. And after that, though, what happened was I developed it into a broader proposal. I went to the San Francisco Foundation, went to City Hall. I ended up raising $150,000. And I called it was a clinic, and I called it Change Incorporated, because Community Health Alliance for Neighborhood Growth and Education. Because what I learned during my research is that, African Americans and people who have not been part of the system, are worried and still very skeptical of mental health services and the stigma associated with it. So I wanted to destigmatize it. So that was the first thing I did. Secondly, I decided that this mental health center, based on the proposal and a paper I wrote, would have, yes, a counseling and direct service component, but we'd also have an advocacy component, because once again, if a woman, for example, I remember one woman I was seeing, she had 5 kids, no money, she was on the streets, no place to live, trying to raise these 5 kids. So I said, So we need a component that really has a referral service, so that at the same time this individual is in therapy, they can receive the services of advocacy and help weed through the bureaucracy, help her find a house, help her find a job, help her get daycare. And then the other part was prevention, going into the community, doing community mental health forums, helping the community identify what systems were in place that were causing people to end up at change and why they needed to change the dynamics around the organizations and the programs and the policies. So, you know, it was a pretty broad kind of program. And it lasted 10 years until Ronald Reagan cut the budget. OEO, because I ended up getting some OEO money. I share that with you because what happened was I learned then during that process that not only are people struggling as it relates to just their economic survival, but it's also those policies that we set here and in Sacramento and in the city that are really causing some of these difficulties, and so we had to change policies. And so Rondell was asking me to come back here to work for him, and of course he is a social worker, freedom warrior, champion for peace and justice, and I worked for him as his chief of staff for 11 years. And that was the time when I began to really look at the policies, which I'm still doing, that impact people's daily lives. And so social workers, we have to do it all. And I think our code of ethics really drives what we do and really gives us what we need to say, yeah, we can do it all and we should do it all. And now what we're seeing in terms of all the challenging and serious issues confronting our communities and our country and the most vulnerable, our time has come once again to really surface. And I'm so glad to see so many of you here on the Hill, because you need to get to these members of Congress and lobby them and tell them to support everything on, and it's so good to see how organized you are with all of us, especially HR 1378, the Dorothy Height with the young, gotta do that, and all of the issues, get folks on board on this. Let me say just a couple of things about poverty. 45 million people living in poverty, that's 1 in 6. We can't ignore the fact that so many of our neighbors, co-workers, friends, and family members face the challenges of poverty each and every day. A large percentage of people living in poverty are working, okay? It's really immoral that we pay such a low wage. The minimum wage is so low that people who are working 1 and 2 jobs still are living below the poverty line. So we've got to raise not only the minimum wage, but lead to a living wage, because that's what people deserve. Dr. King gave a speech at Stanford University. Oh, I have to quote Stanford. Oh boy. But this was in 1967, Stanford and Cal. We got this going. But he talked about, it was a speech in 1967 entitled Two Americas. He explained to the students, he said, there are literally 2 Americas. One America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. Tragically and unfortunately, he said, there's another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the ebulliency of hope into the fatigue of despair. But that was in 1967. Sadly, after 5 decades, there's still 2 Americas, and I think you all know that. Not only Baltimore, but you look at Oakland, you look at, Philadelphia, you look at cities around the country, abandoned neighborhoods, people struggling just to make it through the day. Despair is everywhere, and at some point, we're going to have to take on this system that's causing this despair of so many. We've got to take it up. Just 2 weeks ago, and I've got to applaud Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Any of you from New York here, you need to tell her, she's the ranking member on the Joint Economic Committee. She came out with a report called The Economic State of Black America. And I'll tell you what the findings are, and we can't forget that race is still a factor, okay? And this whole income inequality struggle. Race is a huge factor, so don't let them tell you that if you talk about race, don't let them say you're playing the race card, because we've got to sweep race from under the carpet, under the rug, and talk about it honestly, be bold about it, and recognize we've got to address the unfinished business of America, and that's racism and institutionalism. So let me tell you what this report found. Black Americans experience an unemployment rate more than double the rate of white Americans, over 10%. Median income of African American households is $34,000, which is nearly $24,000 less than the median income of white households. More than 1 in 4 African Americans live in poverty. That's almost triple the rate for whites, and there are many, many whites living in poverty because of the numbers in terms of being minorities in this country. African Americans have the highest rate. Children in African American households are nearly twice as likely to be raised in the bottom 20% of income distribution as children in white households. In my home state of California, we're not, setting the trend for how not to do this. Our policies, let me tell you what the statistics are, they're even worse. African Americans make up just 7% of the state's population in my home state, but we have an unemployment rate of 14%. 14%, that's double the unemployment rate in general. In California, more than 26 African Americans live in poverty compared to just 10% of white Californians. And for the Latino population, the Asia Pacific American population, the statistics are very, very similar. So this report should be a wake-up call. And so California, when you look at the report, I hope you get a copy of it. And maybe, Emma, let's bring some over here. You need to read this report because what it shows, you can look at Alabama, you can look at Arkansas, you can look at California, you can look at New York, you can look at every state in the country. And what's common among that state is African Americans are under siege in many, many respects. And so just understand that what we're seeing around the country needs some real action, and we don't need to continue to tinker around the edge, but we need to break down these systemic and institutional barriers that continue to prevent African Americans and people of color from living the American dream. And that is part of what we as social workers must be committed to do. That's what we have to do. So once again, as you know, it's always busy up here, so I've got to move on. But I just want to say to you how happy I am to see so many of you here today. You make me very proud. I think there's 7 of us, which is not enough. So I know some of you might be interested in running for Congress one day. We need more social workers. So call me, think about it, and want to do it, because we need you here, and I appreciate being able to be with you for a few minutes, and congratulations on such a phenomenal NASW.